in Channel 18's continuing efforts to help you prepare for an emergency during Emergency Preparedness Month. With me today, Executive Director Hillary Green from the Cape and Islands and all of Southeastern Massachusetts Red Cross. Hillary, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paula. It's great to be here.
So we've been doing a few different talks with folks, trying to get people to start making a plan.
Yeah.
Emergency strikes in different ways. It can come as a hurricane, which we've just seen in the South recently. It can come as a awful spring storm, not winter, but spring.
Yes.
March was what, 3 nor'easters in a row.
Yeah.
Or it can come as what we call a winter cane, which showed up in 2013 where we had 100-mile-an-hour winds and sticky, pasty snow. A lot of folks here on the Cape actually don't necessarily go to shelters. They shelter in place, and that's what we're going to talk about today. First, though, give us a little information on what the Red Cross does here locally.
Well, locally, we the office right here in Hyannis is our humanitarian services, which means we do disaster response. We don't run blood drives there. We do have blood drives throughout the area, and that's where our disaster supplies are placed. And we teach classes, you know, the CPR first aid classes. We do trainings. We also do the CNA state testing. We're the only place on the Cape and Islands that does the actual testing so people can become CNAs. So it's a busy place, a lot of volunteer work, but a big part of what we do is preparedness, trying to get the message out, because people really don't think about it until they hear, oh, a hurricane's coming. And then they go buy bread and milk. Why bread? I don't know. You know,
French toast.
And it just is not going to keep if you lose power. So that's what kind of cracks me up about the milk thing. So anyway, but we want to make sure that everybody knows several things. I mean, it's really easy to prepare for a disaster. It's make a kit, make a plan, meaning if you've got family members and some of them aren't home when the hurricane hits, or we're talking even maybe a fire. I mean, something sudden that you don't know, like those gas explosions up in Lawrence and North Andover, and then be informed. So how do you do that when you're in the middle of a disaster? Well, you prepare at home. Well, shelter at home means when the governor goes, don't go on the roads. Shelter at home, shelter in place, whatever that means. And I want to talk specifically to some of the seniors on the Cape. We've got a lot of senior folks, and the shelters that we open on a regional basis in March and in the other storms, almost over 70% of the population there are over the age of 75. Wow. So a lot of seniors make up a vulnerable population, so they need to know what to do. And it's a little different for seniors or people who have different physical abilities or needs. So what I like to say is that be prepared to lose power. This is Cape Cod. It's not that different than anywhere else. If there's 100-mile-an-hour winds and the wires are up and a tree falls, you know, you're going to lose power. So plan to lose power. Right. So what do you do when you lose power? For example, in the March storms, it was cold enough that you could just get a cooler and put it out there with your perishable foods. In the summer, you need to get ice and all that. But it kind of cracked me because a lot of people are like, oh, I lost a lot of food. I'm like, why didn't you just put it in the cooler out in the snow? You know, it would have been fine there. But making sure you have flashlights and not candles, and making sure you've got the supplies at home ready to go. So you should have water, 1 gallon per person per day, a 3-day supply laid in, non-perishable snacks and food, and if you've got cans of things, make sure you have a can opener.
Oh, yeah.
You know, a non-power can opener. And a radio. This is kind of a silly little version, but they have hand crank radios, so that you don't need batteries and you don't need power. But that's how you stay informed. You know, are shelters opened, or what are the emergency services available? Have a first aid kit around. This is a mini first aid kit, but also this is a safety tube which has things like a mask, a whistle, a light stick, a water pouch, because should it be a terrible storm and you're blocked off, you want to have a whistle that you can say, I'm here, you know, get people's attention. Okay. Have copies of your personal documents, copies of them, cash, because the ATMs go down. Right. Emergency contact information. So a lot of people, I got a lot of calls at the chapter house from people who they were out of town and their mother lived on the Cape. And they're 88 years old and they're in the dark and they're cold. and they want us to do something about it. Well, we want to cut that down as much as possible. So be prepared to lose power. What if you do lose heat? You know, do you have extra blankets? Do you have thermal blankets? You know, these amazing emergency blankets.
These are really warm too.
They are, and it looks silly, but you know,
Right.
it reflects body heat back to the body. So you can have things like that, but be prepared. Just assume you'll lose power.
Right.
And the other thing to remember with losing power in a storm is that the workers cannot get up in those bucket trucks until the wind dies down, which happened in one of the March
Right.
storms. It was 2 days before it went below. They can't get up in a bucket truck unless it's under 70-mile-an-hour winds, and it wasn't for several days.
Right.
So there was nothing that could be done. Cell phone with have extra charging cords, and make a plan is contact your daughter who lives in North Carolina and say, here's what's happening, I plan to stay. Who's your emergency manager? Do you know who the emergency manager in your town is? It's either the fire chief or police chief or
It is the police chief here in the town of Barnstable. Chief Sonneman is our emergency manager.
Yeah, and there's a non-emergency number, and some towns, not every town, keeps a list of vulnerable population. So they know in a disaster or a storm that, okay, there's somebody who lives alone and doesn't have transportation. Not every town does, but contact your emergency manager and make sure that you know the plan.
Right.
So that's important to know. And maps of the area. I was just saying this when I was up in the Lawrence shelter yesterday, responding to the explosions. It's hard to find these old-fashioned maps, but you know, not only GPS if the power's out, but also if there's flooding, and GPS is going to send you down a road that is flooded. So you need to have a map of the area. When they say Smith Street is closed, take South Street and know where that is. So a map is really important.
That's great advice. I had not thought of that one.
I know it's hard to find. You can see my map is from Cape Cod Bank and Trust. It's a little, but anyway. So, but those are the type of things to have. It's just so important to make the plan with your family, with your caregiver. If you have somebody who assists you medically at home, and you have to go to the shelter, one of the regional shelters here, you need to have a plan that, because the people who work in the shelter can't be your individual assistant there. Either they can come with you, but that's a different situation with if you're going to a shelter, what to bring.
Right.
But we're talking about at home, and make sure you've got extra medications,
Right.
you've got keys and batteries. This is a neat thing. I talked about the hand crank radio. This is a hand crank flashlight. This one also has you can charge your phone.
Oh, and there's a radio on
yes,
it and everything. So yeah, those little multi-item tools.
Yes. Yep.
One of the things that I saw there that I thought was a really good item too is the old handy-dandy Swiss Army knife.
Yes.
You know, in a lot of the cases, if your home is somewhat inaccessible, maybe there's a tree down in the kitchen or something like that, having a tool, a multi-tool, a Leatherman or a Swiss Army knife is really, really important.
It is, and I have one there, but also, you know, they sometimes say have work gloves and duct tape, because of course duct tape solves everything.
Pretty much.
But because, yeah, you might have, something might happen to your house, a tree might fall, you might need to move things or whatever, or even cut things or something. But yeah, just be prepared. And the whole idea of preparedness is preparing for a problem. So assume you won't have power. Assume you might get cold or hot or whatever. What are you going to do? Make sure you've got enough to eat and drink, and that it will keep.
Right. And I think one of the most important things that you've touched upon is communicating that plan. You know, I know our senior centers and some of our vulnerable population does not have family here on the Cape with them. So we really want folks to say, here's what my plan is to people that are off Cape that care about you. It's important that folks understand where you might go or whether you are sheltering in place. When disaster strikes, that's not the time to try to pick up the cell phone and call your daughter.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you're right about letting people know. So like if you're a member of a faith community and they always keep great tabs on their vulnerable population, the elderly. If you're going to your daughters in Virginia, let them know. So they're not knocking on the door thinking, oh my God, Mrs. Smith, you know, is she okay? And if you are sheltering at home, again, let them know. If you need help with transportation. But yeah, it's something you need to talk about, and so everybody in your family and friends in your network know, and And the other side is you know what resources are available to you, like the emergency manager. So the emergency manager in your town is responsible for making sure you're safe or whatever, and if you do need transportation to a shelter, that they are the contact for that. Sometimes it's the National Guards. CCRTA has been wonderful during storms.
Yep.
They run extra buses and they pick people up, and so it's just something that maybe people don't want to talk about it, and we haven't been hit with a big storm, but look all around us. Certainly the gas explosions can happen anywhere. And the storms in March were, they were tricky because it got cold. Travel was stopped for a while, and again, I took a lot of calls from people. They should have been concerned about their parents, but there should have been a plan in place.
Right.
So
we're really encouraging folks to put these plans in place now, today.
Yes.
It's going to be nice this week. It's you'll have a little bit of time. It's cloudy. Rainy days are a good thing to just sit there and write the things that you might need, and then start to plan. Your communications. What about pets?
Yeah.
Folks really, especially some of our more older population, tends to have companions. They're their pets. What do you do when you shelter in place with your pet?
Well, you make sure you've got, so if you've got food and drink for yourself, make sure you've got food and drink for them. So treat the pet like a person water-wise, because if you lose water, you want to make sure you have water. A carrier for a cat, copies of vet and vaccination stuff in case you do need to leave. All the shelters on Cape Cod are staffed by disaster animal response team. So they all accept pets. Not every shelter and everywhere does. Right. But, extra collar and leash and whatever you need. But yeah, remember the pets. If you're sheltering in place, make sure they have the supplies they need to get through. You should plan to be sheltering in place for 3 days.
Okay.
Do you have enough supplies for that? And so I think it's something where people panic in the wrong ways. And then we all flood the supermarkets. You shouldn't even have to go to the supermarket because you'll have your supplies in place. And you should be confident because you know your plan, you've talked about it with your communities, and then you know how to stay informed. Radio, whatever it is, and not all power goes out all the time, and sometimes you can get somewhere and check on the internet. So there's a lot of good information there.
Excellent. If they have questions or need maybe a link to catalog these items, where can they find more information?
I'm so glad you brought that up. So redcross.org has a lot of preparation information, preparedness. But also, if you do have a smartphone, we have free apps. We have an emergency app, we have a hurricane app, we have a first aid app.
Oh, wonderful.
And they're really great, and they give you little quizzes, they give you alerts. Yesterday when I was in the recovery center in Lawrence and there was a tornado watch, everybody's phone just started pinging, so that's a great way to do it too. And also, even if you've taken a CPR first aid class, and we do 2-year certification, you might not remember everything. So the first aid app, and they're all free. There's a pet first aid app. But redcross.org, you can go down and you can download all the information on what should be in an emergency kit, how to make a plan, be informed, but the apps are great too, and they can give you alerts on things that are coming, and also you can also put an alert for a loved one who lives in North Carolina.
Great.
So and keep track of it that way, and also it'll show you all the shelters that are open in every area.
Perfect.
Yep.
Anything else you want folks to know?
No, just know that the Red Cross is here. Our mission is to prevent and alleviate human suffering. So, and prevent is prevention. So.
Right.
We want to tell as many people as possible how to be safe before, during, and after any disaster.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks, Paula.